Hello and welcome to Women in Post, a podcast and web series for women in post-production by Women in Post-Production. Today on the show, we'll be speaking with Lindsay.
Persevere. Don't let it bother you. Don't take it personally. Don't be insulted and just say, no, I can do this job.
Lindsay, how did you get interested in post-production?
Well, I was going to Emerson College, and I thought at that time I wanted to be a film director, but I couldn't afford what it took to make a film practicum film. So I started editing other people's work. And I realized that my natural love of organizing and of storytelling, that it was a perfect match. Plus, I always liked collaborating with people. And so I knew that I liked it, and I've been doing it ever since. I've been very lucky. I've been consistently doing it since then, in both documentaries and in feature fiction and television, as you mentioned. So it's been a great variety.
How did you first get started in the industry?
I graduated from Emerson College, which is a communications-based school in Boston, Massachusetts. And after a week after graduation, I said, I better go find a job. And I went to the career services. And just by the coincidence of luck, the great documentarian filmmaker Frederick Wiseman's office called in looking for an assistant for their film distribution for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And 6 years and 6 films later, I'm still in touch with him. So that was an amazing experience. And I knew exactly who he was because I was a big fan of his work. And I thought that he lived in New York. So I was really surprised that he found out he lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and works out of Cambridge. So I literally grabbed the phone. It's one of those things that if I thought about it, I would have been too shy. But it was totally impulsive. And I just grabbed the phone. I was like, I'll be right there. And I had 50 cents to my name at the time. That was just enough to get a bus to where he lived. And so that's a lot about this industry, right? It's luck. It just is.
Uh-huh. That's amazing. Yeah. Now, for some of our viewers who might not know who Frederick is, can you give an idea of what kind of work he's done?
Yes, he's considered really the godfather of cinema verite, along with the Masalas brothers and D.A. Penbaker. And he's the last, really, of that generation. He's now in his late 80s, and he's been making a film a year since the late 60s. His first one was Titicut Follies, which is very well known because it was a censored film, because it showed the inside of a mental institution for the criminally insane. Every one of his movies, or almost every one of his movies, are about an American institution. And so he really considers his work, which is now, must be at least 45 films, as one big giant film. He directs and edits his work, and it was amazing to have him as a mentor. And to this day, he's still one of the hardest people I've ever met in the business. He just works all the time really hard.
What is something, maybe one thing that you feel that you really learned from working with him?
That you need to go through all the footage again and again and again, and that the story is in the footage and not in the script. And I feel that way in both fiction and in documentary.
That's really interesting. When you talk to producers or directors mainly, I mean, my experience is look at the script and make it work. But that doesn't sound like, it sounds like it's totally different.
Well, there's really 3 steps in a film. Right? There's the pre-production, that's the script writing. And then there's the production, and a lot of things that they wanted to do in the script they couldn't do for various reasons. And then there's in the editing room where whatever their intention was, and you try, if you're doing fiction, to work with them in their intention, but it's there that you have. That's what you've got. And so sometimes characters change. And when I worked on the film Sliver, which was a big Paramount picture, Billy Baldwin was supposed to be the bad guy, not Tom Berenger.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
Things have to, because it didn't work. When I worked on the movie Seven, David Fincher's film, an amazing experience. And I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about this or not, but that whole last scene, what's in the box, that was not originally there. The ending didn't work. So that's why if you watch the film, suddenly it looks like they're out in the desert somewhere. Now anything else in the film looks like that. That's because it didn't work. And in the editing room, no matter what we did, we couldn't get it to work.
Oh my gosh, that must have been so stressful.
Well, it's just amazing because you take a movie like Seven, and one of the most famous lines is, "What's in the box?" As Brad Pitt is freaking out, and we all know it's Gwyneth Paltrow's head. Sorry, spoiler alert. We get to it. But that's also what's exciting about post-production, isn't it? Because we really are making the films in the editing room. That's what I love about it. And I love the flexibility, and that's why I also love documentaries, because a lot of times you have no idea what the story is. That's what and going back, that's what I learned from Fred Wiseman. The story is in the footage. Mm-hmm. And when you are lucky enough to collaborate with the director, that's really great. It's really fun to dig through and find the story together.
Mm-hmm. And now, so story arcing is one of your specialties, right? How would you describe that process to somebody?
Well, for me, the most important part of editing is the emotion. And so you first find yourself as an audience member interested in the person, and then you want to be with them. And then what happens on their adventure? And sometimes what makes you, depending on the story, what makes you not want to be with a person anymore, or really fighting for them. And you've got to, that's another reason why you're going to look through the footage again and again, because it's always in nuances. It's not in the words. It's what they look at or what they don't look at, what they say or they don't say. And when you're making editing choices, if you want your main character, for instance, to be sympathetic, well, you're going to cut to a person who looks at them sympathetically, because then the audience feels they are that person. As opposed to if you cut to a person who looks at them with a attitude or negativity, then the audience is going to think that way about the person. That's all the character building, and that's all part of the arcing towards the story. Uh-huh. You know, a great place for beginning editors, I always say, is watch Law and Order, all of the Law and Orders, because they really use the people in the room, how they feel about the other person. It's like it's amazing. So
really?
So they really, here's the bad guy, and here's what the DA thinks, and here's what the other person thinks. And so they always are cutting to the expressions. And now a lot of the other shows like Bones and all those other kind of shows, they do that. But, actually who originally did it was Gunsmoke. I don't even know if you can see that show anymore. There's an old Western called Gunsmoke, and it was on television forever. And they really did that technique. And it's really great. It's like a triangle in the room. It's also a good technique because it keeps everybody alive. That's really important in editing, in both fiction and nonfiction, keeping everybody alive.
What does that mean exactly?
That means, like, if you're doing a monologue, don't forget about the other people in the room who are listening to you. Mm-hmm. Don't forget them, because they're part of the emotional landscape. And so sometimes lazy editors will just, forget that person. And then that's why it's really great when you have an actress that's really good. Like, let's say Meryl Streep. The camera's not always on her, because anytime you go to her, it's going to work. So you got to help these other actors who aren't as strong, but you got to keep them alive. So there's a lot of interesting things there.
If you have, say, like 50% of a speaker's face showing and 50% of the person they're talking to showing, is that something to strive for, or do you just kind of feel it?
You totally have to feel it. And really, again, it's how much you want the audience to like this person or dislike this person. Mm-hmm. If you go to a party, and it's the kind of party where a lot of people are in the kitchen, and there's always the guy, the bro, who's telling the story and trying to get the attention. Watch the other people around. Listen to the other people, how they react to him. Who looks away? Who doesn't? What is he doing to try to keep their attention? See, everywhere is the craft of editing. Everywhere. So if you in your story wanted the bro at the party to be the center of attention, then you get 50%. But really, if that's not the story and it's really something over here that's happening, then so there's no rules. That's another thing that people do often, young editors especially. They will say, okay, this has to be 24 minutes. And that's the first thing they worry about. Well, we can't even use that because it's got to be 24 minutes. Don't worry about the time. Because it's amazing how naturally it falls into place. And often directors and people have worked out beforehand. In documentaries, it can be tricky, but even then, don't worry about it. And then when you have a masterpiece and it's 3 minutes too long, then you go back and you take it out. But I see a lot of people don't worry about time. And that's another thing I actually learned from Fred. But with that said, Fred Wiseman is famous for the length of his movies. So.
Well, okay, so as far as time in the editing room, how much is too much time to spend editing a movie? Is there such a thing?
No. I mean, when the budget runs out, or when you've got to, it's got to open up for the theater, or I have an old assistant, lovely editor, a man named James Crow, and he went on to work for Jimmy Kimmel for years. And he used to say to me, well, if I only had the luxury to look through all the footage like you do, Lindsay. So there is that. That's more the newsroom too. But it's always longer than people think. Like documentaries, you got to give it 6 months to a year. I mean, it's always longer than one thinks. And that's why the people in sound always get in trouble, because there's never any money or time left for them. That generally happens after the picture. So it's always more than you think. So anytime a director says, or you say to yourself, I can do this in 3 weeks. No.
No. Is there a project that was your favorite and maybe a project that you hated to work on?
There's nothing I've hated. I've been really lucky that way. I think I learned pretty early on how to recognize what would be a good experience and what wouldn't be, even though sometimes I gave up money opportunities. Because I was lucky enough to do a variety, it was really fun to be an A-list assistant and then later associate editor and stuff on big, big films. But that's a very different experience than being in the basement working on a documentary about political change. Right now I'm working with a lot of artists, which is really great. Favorite picture, the thing about those big features, those big Hollywood features, is they're always full of so much drama. I mean, because especially when they had the big budgets. And there's always, a Sliver was famous for that because Sharon Stone did this and someone else did that. But even films that were tough as a woman, like any of the Jerry Bruckheimer experiences, that includes Michael Bay. And it was only tough because you recognize early on that there's no place for you to move up.
There's no place for you to move up?
Move up. That's actually because they make very macho action films, and there is still an idea in Hollywood that only men can cut those films, can edit
really?
Films, which is crazy because Tarantino's editor, until she sadly passed, Sally Meckins, I don't never pronounce her name right, she was one of the greatest action editors. Because it's a masculine. It's masculine. There's still like the women cut the love movies and the men cut the action movies, which is absolutely ridiculous, of course. And because those were particularly masculine films, The Rock, Armageddon, Transformer films, Bad Boys, I knew that I wanted to be the lead editor, so I had to leave that. But that still was a great experience. I mean, that was an insane experience because they have big crews and huge films with lots of money, especially then.
When you were cutting The Rock, or when you were assisting on The Rock, right? They have the main editor and then a couple assistants. Well,
the budget for that was huge, and also that was when they were still shooting a lot of stuff on film. So there had to be we were editing on Avid, but parallel on film. And that film had a huge budget and a tough deadline. And Michael shoots a lot of footage, a lot of footage. So we actually had 4 editors, and then a lot like people like me were working at night doing a lot of the B-roll editing and the sound editing. So let's say we had 5 editors. We had something like, this never happens anymore, 6 or 7 assistants, 4 film conformers. Then right down the hallway were all the sound people. George Waters, one of the greatest sound people in town. He probably had a crew of 10. Wow. It doesn't happen anymore. Now it looks like there's one editor, there's one assistant, and there's one post assistant. So there's a lot less jobs.
What's the difference between an assistant and a post assistant?
Post assistant's the one who runs and gets the new drives, delivers the drives, uploads stuff, gets you lunch. When there's a chance, you try to teach them. You throw the manual at them, or you told them YouTube videos to watch. They're extra hands. They do a lot of running around. A lot of times they'll deliver because, especially if it's in town, they'd rather just deliver the drive than load it up because there's a lot of worry, even though a lot of sites are private, there's worries of privacy. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of script changes, script notes. So the post does all that. Mm-hmm. It's actually a very good way to get in. But these are, again, big budget films. I mean, I don't know if you want to also talk about much smaller things like smaller independent films. Because that's I mean, it's the same trade, but you're constantly struggling for not enough money. And it can be really heartbreaking. So to answer your question, the hardest thing is, we were in the middle of doing this film about the history of the student movement all through archival footage. And it's a fantastic project with the great documentary director, David Zeiger. But we just can't get enough funding, no matter what we do. And that's the heartbreak. The heartbreak is when there's really great films. And then there's a lot of films I've worked on and put my heart and soul into that just never got the distribution it needed. So that's heartbreaking. But that's the name of it, I think.
Okay, well, let's view the clip that you sent over. I'm going to share the screen here.
Oh, this is Andrea Bauer's piece.
Within regards to my relationship with the earth and with nature, they always made sure that I was aware that everything had a life force within it. Everything has its own autonomy and its own free will. And so to be able to humanize the things around me as my relatives rather than something that I could own or take advantage of was something that was really monumental in becoming the activist that I am now. Because a lot of my work involves bringing awareness to that relationship, the relationship that human beings have with the earth, this relationship that is supposed to be nourishing and beautiful and loving. And right now, it's a relationship that's very abusive, and it's something that needs to be fixed.
So that is, let me explain that a little bit. The reason I showed that is that's what I just finished cutting. In fact, today I've got to put German subtitles on it. There's a great ecofeminist artist named Andrea Bauers, and she is born in Ohio, but she works out of Los Angeles. And this is a piece that we did together. That is a young, very important climate change activist named Dakota Iron Eyes, and she's from Pine Ridge. She's actually originally from Standing Rock, and then on Pine Ridge. And at 12 years old, she was very active in the Standing Rock demonstrations. So we went and she showed us 5 of her most sacred sites and explained to us why she's an activist, what the earth means to her. And Andrea Bauers, being an artist, she wanted to approach it in a much, not in a traditional way of making a documentary. So it's really a landscape of beauty and a lot of abstract. And it was really fun to edit because of that. And Dakota, and one of the tricks of that was Dakota is only 16 and she's really articulate. And so how to make sure people don't think that that was the way I manipulated the footage. So that film just premiered at Andrew Krepp's gallery in Tribeca, Manhattan, which the New York Times said it was like, don't miss this. It's a beautiful film. It's been picked up. It's about to go play in Germany. So in the end, it's the same way of editing. You got to tell an arc and the audience has to care about it. Mm-hmm. And this was really fun because there was no length. I mean, in the end, the piece is 54 minutes, but because I worked in so much television, we have to deliver it at 23 minutes. And so in that piece, we had 3 cameras going, but we also shot a lot of, you could see, a lot of fabric, and so it was a challenge to figure out how to put that in there. And I didn't want it just to be talking heads of her. It's a beautiful shot. She's in these gorgeous places. And then it could be too, I don't want to get so abstract that people are like, what is this? Because we're not used to watching things that way. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting to do. And in that case, which is my favorite thing, Andrea Bauers gave me a lot of freedom to edit. And then she came in at the end and we got excited about cutting it down together. I do like that. I like cutting on my own a lot and then do the collaboration. And I think that kind of editing requires a lot of confidence. Like, I don't think I could have done that when I was 22, just starting, because I wouldn't have known the choices to make. I wasn't brave enough to make the right kind of choices. And I wanted to play honor. This is the other thing I got to say about everything I've edited. I pay honor to the person, even when it's Danny Baldwin in a shoot 'em up movie, where it's just like lots of guns and a lot of shooting, and then so that, do I take on the character of the person I'm editing? Yes. So I was very much like Danny Baldwin in that period. I smoked a lot. I wore a leather jacket. I swore a lot. Now with Takata, I'm talking about the beauty of the earth a lot, but that's part of, but I do pay homage. And it's great when you work on a film where it's such an honor to have worked with Takata. It was such an honor to work with Andrea. And I'm really excited the film's being seen. And when I have a moment, I'm also going to try to get it, the gallery and I are going to try to get it into film festivals, because there's a big difference between the art world and the traditional film world. And I see that there shouldn't be. They don't know about each other's work, and some of it's fantastic.
Which world do film festivals belong in?
Well, they're traditionally in the independent films, right? Film festivals don't seem as important as they used to be because of the rise of Netflix, Amazon, and other streaming services.
Mm-hmm. What I really liked about the clip that you shared was that, like, it was surprising in its stillness and in the close-ups, and it's just the delicate movements of things. It made it feel wide open. Like, it made it feel like you could feel that wind on your own skin. I never expected to see a close-up make me feel like I was in the middle of a field, in the middle of the wilderness. Like, I feel like you could really feel her personality come through as if she was, like, sitting right next to you in the grass. So I thought that was really well done.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's really great, because emotionally, that's exactly what I was hoping.
There were some other things that I know that we wanted to talk about from our conversation before. Do you remember what something of those were?
Well, some of them were about, this is a podcast mostly about women in post-production.
Yeah.
And post-production in general. And there has to be a discussion about both the sexism and the racism in the field. There's just no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it improving in Hollywood better than it used to. But there's this issue with that post-production is technical, and therefore women aren't going to be as good at it. Because it's a technical field. So there's that which one has to overcome. And then as far as race, it's just a reality that but luckily there's more and more directors like Ava, let's see if I can pronounce her last name.
Last names are hard.
Great director of Selma and many other things. And she has single-handedly brought many more younger people in their 20s and 30s into the post room. And if you see her crew from Wrinkle in Time, and it's most all African-American. And she also has done a lot to bring female directors. She had her series Queen Sugar, which I believe she only had women of color be the directors. Now, some people might object to that because that seems unfair on the other side, but really, right now, it's so uneven. So I would just say to people, persevere. Don't let it bother you. Don't take it personally. Don't be insulted and just say, no, I can do this job. No. And that's the advice I do give. Learn it all. Learn how to be really good at Avid or Premiere or whatever your editing platform is. So now not only do you have to be a great editor emotionally, the more, if you want to break into the field or if you want to stay in or you want to move up, be good at After Effects. Be good at it. And when some producer says, are you sure you can do it? Just say, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things that we talked about. And I have seen, because I've been working in Hollywood long enough, I have seen the landscape change. But if you look at the cast and crew of big films, you'll see that it's still mostly predominantly white men. Which is funny because in the old days, long before I was alive in the 30s, it was mostly women on the studios. That's why they were called cutters, like seamstresses. So that's something that we talked about that I thought was important to bring up, and kudos to the people who are trying to change that. Yeah. And I actually always try to find, like in the piece you just showed, I wanted a female sound editor. I wanted a female composer. and there just wasn't enough of them to choose from that were available. Now, I had a great crew, but if you even look at the credits of that movie, besides me, everyone else in post is a guy, and the artist, but Lindsay, I was like,
oh no. So the women are out there, right? And a lot of times, you're not the only one who've said this, that we know the women are there, but they're not showing up when it's time to get chosen. What are some ways that people can stand out so that they can be found, or that they can throw their hat in the ring to make sure that they're doing their best to give themselves that opportunity?
Well, definitely it's a networking field, even in smaller towns. And if you're in a town that doesn't have some sort of women post-production or women director or women in film or documentary meetups, start one, like what you're doing here. Because it's about who you know. Like, I'm sure there was 10 available female sound editors. And I called friends, and I called the people I knew, and then I called friends and asked if they knew people. So it's definitely putting your name out there, making sure everyone knows who you are, and making sure that someone like me can find you. And I think, I think websites are important now that they have, in the old days it was like reels, whatever that meant. But, you saw my website where I actually just have clips of work, a variety of work.
It sounds like you got to know people. You have to be connected to a chain of people somehow. It's not going onto job boards online and applying for things through, typical job applications, right? You got to know the people.
Well, it depends. Like if you're trying to get a full-time job in a commercial house, then the job post might work. But somebody like me, this doesn't even dawn on me to go to a job place because I want the recommendation from somebody who's worked with them. Or I want to talk to them directly on the phone, and how do I reach them? I don't even think about going on a job board. That's even true in the union. The union has job boards, and no one ever thinks about going on them. It's always like, wow. And I got to tell you, people are always looking for post people. They're always like, oh, I need another editor. Who are we going to hire? I need a good graphics artist. Who do we have? Mm-hmm. What, did some of the women that you've interviewed, do they say that it's hard for them to get out, to be known, to get out there?
I actually haven't had anyone said that yet.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. Which I really expected to hear that a lot more. And so, like, everybody's talked about how there's less women, but nothing about how they were discriminated against so far.
So there is something else interesting, which is just the reality of it, which is a lot of the men, particularly a lot of the older men, are uncomfortable being in a dark room with a female. This is even before the Me Too movement. I worked with a TV director for years, and he said to me that. He said, besides you, Lindsay, I can't think of, I just would be uncomfortable. That's their trip, that's their head. But that's something that you got to combat. And it's partly society, the way I guess we bring people up. I once worked with a very well-known Black director, excellent. And he kept the door, we were doing a TV show together, and he always made sure the door was open. Mm-hmm. He didn't want any. So, I mean, there's just, which is crazy, but there's just a lot of that. That's what we have to deal with too. Or, I've worked with producers who would put their hand on my knee and say, oh, wait, oh, good. And now with the Me Too movement all over, that there's even more of that going on. So that as a woman, just know that it's kind of a man's field, and that there's no room for sexual harassment. They just don't know what to do, and that you can maybe help them.
Yeah.
This is okay, this isn't okay. And for everyone, it's different. This is all right, but some, especially the older generation, they just can't do it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why, but they can't. And so that's just there's another job we just lost. So. But that's okay, because we can have a rise of female directors. But there's another thing I got to say about that. If you look at a lot of the rise of female directors, which is terrific, but because of their first time or only second time directors, the production companies will put a white young editor with them. You see, or a male editor with them. So they don't quite trust them. But to be fair, that generally happens anytime whether it's a female or a male. If it's a new editor, a new director, they want to put a editor in the room who they know is experienced.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, I was just talking to somebody yesterday about she works in Chicago at the only post-production house for scripted TV in Chicago, obviously. And what she said when I asked her why there aren't more post houses in Chicago when we have shows like Chicago Fire and Chicago Med and all of those, we have lots of shows here. And she goes, well, you can't start a post house to produce these shows when all the experience is in Hollywood or New York, because they have to be able to trust that we'll get the job done. So there's kind of like apprehension there too. Do you see that changing at all in the near future?
There was a little bit when a lot of the productions went to Canada. And so suddenly they realized that when Toronto particularly starts building studios and saying, hey, look, we've got the people. So slowly that is, I know in Atlanta, for instance, it's definitely true. They never used to do posts in Atlanta. Now they do all their posting in Atlanta for those shows that are shot down there. I think some true in New Mexico too. I think Breaking Bad, it used to come, those shows like that. In the last 2 seasons of Breaking Bad, I think they moved it to New Mexico. I don't know. I could see that definitely changing, especially producers can be more confident because of it's easier to stream, it's easier to upload stuff, download, they can immediately get their confidence. But there's a control issue too. See, a lot of the producers, like even in Chicago Fire, a lot of them live in Hollywood, right? So if they live in Hollywood, they want to get back to their families. So that's another reason why they want to post here. It really depends where the producers are from. Like the Chicago Fire, do you know where was that production company Chicago based or was it really Hollywood based?
No, the show that's Chicago based is called what is it called? Work in Progress.
Are you guys? Is it a union town?
Chicago? Oh yeah. I mean, there's lots of. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, and we've got union signs in people's front yards all over the place. They're blue. Well, ours are blue. Lots of union people. By the way, how has your experience been in the union? Are you in the film union?
Yeah, I've been in the union for a long time, and it was great. The problem is that ever since the recession of 2008, it just has never the union work in this town, and maybe it's me. I don't know. Maybe I haven't been aggressive enough about it, but I have not done a union job in years, which is too bad because I miss that Social Security and that pension. The union also, because they don't have as many crews, and reality television really changed because most of that is all non-union. And so the value of the union and the understanding of the value of the union's gone down a lot. It used to be, when I first came in this town, you couldn't work at all in this town unless you were in the union. So it was really intense. There was a lot of choices. The union didn't see a lot of changes coming. They didn't see the runway post-production come. They didn't see desktop editing coming. They didn't see reality TV coming. So if someone is coming to Hollywood, I recommend they get in the union. But like I said, I'm doing fine, and I haven't done the union job for years. Because, the art show, that art movie's not going to do union. The documentaries, most of them are non-union. They can't afford to be. Independent films, most of them can't afford to be. So,
Are there any groups that you have found incredibly valuable for your experience?
Yeah, I think Film Independent is good. I think Women in Film is good. One way that I end up doing work is if there's something that I really care about, like a political cause or historical thing, or I have a lot of interests. So I go to those things, even if they're not film oriented, but it's the history of the Columbia University strike. Oh, that's interesting. I go there and then I meet somebody who's trying to make a movie. A lot, especially if you're interested in documentary, a lot of it has to do with what your interests are. You meet people, the odds. When I did years of Nickelodeon television, I met that producer at a pool party from a mutual friend. It's just like one of those weird things. So, yeah, I would say any of the women groups Any of the, or there's another one here in town that's national or international. It's something like Women in Post. I think it's always good because it's a support system too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if you end up just mentoring people, it's a support system. But I hired a woman I met in one of these Women in Post organizations that was a national organization. She was a production sound mixer, and we needed one. I hired her, and it was great. I wouldn't have found her name anywhere otherwise. We all have to just talk to each other and support each other, not compete. We don't have to compete with each other.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm very competitive, so it's hard for me to really swallow that, but compete with everybody. But
I say that partly because women, I think we're raised to compete with each other, and partly because there's so little crumbs that we can grab. And I think that those days are changing, and I think that we can be more open. With that said, so many jobs I was on, I was the only female.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. I've been, I get along with men. I have an older brother. I have a lot of, and I actually sometimes didn't even notice it, but I'd have like a friend who was not in the industry visit, and they'd say, "You're the only woman here." I'm like, "I am."
I never noticed. You know what? I honestly didn't notice for like a year that I had never worked with another woman unless she was the actress, and never noticed until, when was it? I think there was some kind of a show on YouTube that A.C.E did, and all the people on the stage were men, and it was just kind of like, wait a minute, where are the women? But is there anything that you think a woman can bring to editing that more than a man?
Well, this is a tricky subject because you're not supposed to say these things, but yeah, we bring emotion, generally speaking. There's some great male editors, but I mean, I think it's easier for us to find, now it sounds, reverse sexism, my mother would hate this, but I think that we are more empathetic overall. And so we see the subtleties, the emotional subtleties in some of the acting. I think that we are more patient, generally speaking. So, yeah.
Very good.
But, I hate to say that because there's some magnificent male editors, of course. But I think we're more, we're just more family oriented, as they say. I mean, a lot of these things are corny and old, but we really, but so yeah. I'm talking before I get in trouble.
Yeah, I know. It can be kind of hard to talk about things like that.
Well, you don't want to, because some men could say, "Oh yeah, well, women. That's why women can't do action because they're not, aggressive enough." So.
Well, clearly they need to look at your website because you've got a lot of action movies on there. And documentaries. Okay, so I don't mean to keep going to the big productions. There's a lot of value in the smaller ones too. And when it comes to putting those together, like what is the process like? And I know we're running out of time, and I'll let you go, I promise. But like when you get a new smaller project and you sit down to put it together, where do you start?
So if it's a documentary, I start by just starting to look at the footage.
Yeah.
But if it's a fiction piece, I always start with the script. I actually always try to build my first pass is trying to build it with the script. And as I do it, I notice things that aren't working. And if they're still shooting as I do it, then I contact the director. I'm like, you gotta always start with the script because that's only fair for a pre-production and production. But as you're doing it, you can see like this isn't working. That's why it's always important to read the script ahead of time. Like for some reason, independent films love to do things in the script that say things like fade to black, or we'll put a montage here, just watch them falling in love. And then when that doesn't work, because it most often doesn't, then you really wish that they had shot a transition. But because the script said fade to black, or you really wish there had been at least a little more footage of the couple first falling in love instead of them just holding hands in the park and cutting to them holding hands on the beach. Like, let's just have a little bit of a dialogue. And there's very particular films that do that all the time, even the big films. I mean, watch Stars Born Again. That's like drives me crazy. But anyway, so the point being that so I start with the script, and then I immediately can see what's working, what isn't working, and I make little notes, and I put favorites aside that aren't in the script that I know I'm going to use. But I would do the same thing with a big budget film too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's always fun to, whether it's a small budgeted film or a big budgeted film, know that you can break the rules and take chances. If you ever want to watch The Rock, watch the scene where Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage are in this cart, and because for some reason Alcatraz has a underground coal mine or something underneath it. It looks like a ride, and they're stuck in a cart, and there's people on fire, and there's all this crazy stuff. I don't know how well you remember the movie, but if you watch that film, it's that particular scene is cut by the great Mark Goldblatt, who was one of our great action editors in town. He did the Terminators. He's terrific, man. And he's brave. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that scene, you will look cut by cut, and none of it makes sense. You're like, what? But when you watch the whole thing, it's fantastic. Because the right rhythm and the right emotion.
That's amazing.
And a more inexperienced editor would be never have taken the kind of chances. And you can do that even in not action. So, in a documentary too, like, there's no rules. There's no rules.
Maybe that's why we have no books in the library about editing.
Oh, there's one, there's an old classic one called The Cutting Room Floor.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, there's a couple. Oh, and what's a great one? Is Walter Murch is In the Blink of an Eye. Walter Murch is the great editor and sound editor, started with Coppola as a sound editor, In the Blink of an Eye. And he talks about the 5 most important things in editing. And continuity, that's the other thing I always have to say. Young editors get really caught up in continuity. And there's somebody who's a really well-known editor who a friend of mine is working for right now on a big show. And all he does is complain about continuity. And it's like, yeah, it's really great if the actor always picks this up at the same time, the cup up at the same time when he's saying the same line. He's not going to. And some will be better than others. But if you get all caught up trying to match that, then, again, emotion first, and then you'll be amazed what you can get away with. And sometimes it's really frustrating for the actor, but still. People sometimes think that's the number one thing, that and timing, and those are not at all. That's like number 6, 7, I don't know.
I'm definitely going to have to get that book now.
Yeah, it's little. In the Blink of an Eye, Walter Murch. He's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, because we mentioned Walter Murch, because Walter Murch is one of our great editors, and he started as a sound editor for Friends for Coppola, right? I think his first film was Apocalypse Now. If you ever watch his film, The Conversation, it's all about sound. One of the great movies, The Conversation. So a lot of people, particularly directors, don't know this. And even a lot of up-and-coming sound mixers don't know this. But sound is really important, at least to me. And I always have a thing that I try to explain to people: sound is character. So I did a lot of in that film clip that you just showed. I added a lot of sound, and she talks about like the connection of nature. So of course, in her case, I added a lot of sound of bees buzzing and the wind. So I always felt like you could hear Mother Earth talking to her and getting along with her. So the place that I always start is a movie called Once Upon a Time in the West. And it's Sergio Leone's movie. A lot of people probably know it. Charles Bronson. It's a great Western. Maybe Westerns aren't your cup of tea, but I always bring a young director to see the first 10 minutes, because in the first 10 minutes, there's no dialogue. You're introduced to 6 different characters. They each have their own sound. And Sergio Leone's a master of sound as character. And as an editor, it helps you get in the rhythm too. And I don't mean just music, though music can sometimes play an important part of this. But what is going on in the room? And sometimes it can add so much tension. And when you're really lucky is when you have a sound editor who works with a composer and together. And this great sound designer. What is a sound designer? And it's not just, you hear the car going by, so you put a car pass on there. What else is going on in the world around the person? And I think as an editor, we're responsible to teach producers and directors that. And we're also responsible to make sure that the sound designer has the time and the budget to do his or her work. And like 1917 this year, I'm thinking of movies I like this year that had amazing sound. Unbelievable sound. It added to the tension all the time. And maybe that one you think is easier because it was a war film, but it wasn't just war sounds at all.
That's so interesting. What is the sound that naturally builds tension?
Well, traditionally people use like heartbeat and winds but it generally, it's a unattainable little bit of a high pitch. It's that thing that you feel, that ringing in your ear, you feel really tired. And you can't tell if it's really inside you or happening outside. It's the sounds that you feel like you can't control, but you don't know where they're from.
Huh.
So it's not the crying baby. That's just irritating. But it's, and a lot of them are Mother Nature sounds because that's a very powerful place. And it's really fun to think about. It's really fun to play with. George Waters is really great. He's a really great, you'll see him in a lot of the big films. Francis Ford, the director, always understood that. You see a movie like Rumblefish in his early movies. But Walter Murch talks about that too, if we're talking about the editing book. I really think it's fun to put, if you have the time when you're editing something, to explore it yourself. Explore it. Get a sound library. What is, if you're feeling something and it's not being conveyed in the script for the actors, perhaps you can help by, and I don't mean by putting a soundtrack sound in there. Literally, it's the sound design can end up sounding like music, but it really can be, like in your room, right here. I saw a dog earlier. Yeah. If I knew that it was time to wrap up, I would put in that sound of that dog because then the audience realized, she's got to go somewhere.
Oh.
So it becomes other messages. It becomes part of the conversation.
That's so interesting. So the sound library, is there do you have a reference for where somebody can find a sound library?
Oh, sure. Like you can start with free sound. It's free sounds. It's really cool because there's a lot of sound nerds out there and they love to record stuff and then they'll put it up there and they'll let you. So it's all over the internet now. I mean, eventually you might want to build your own. Or there was something called the Hollywood Edge has a great collection, but that might cost a little money. But free, I would start with free sound on the internet. That's literally what it's called.
Awesome.
They have everything. They have all the sounds.
They don't have my wind chimes. Can you hear those over there?
I do hear the wind chimes.
I thought about taking them down, but I thought I love wind chimes so much.
And it tells me something about you. It tells me what the weather's like. It means it's a little windy there. It means that you like that sound, you see? So,
yeah.
Really great.
Okay, so one last question. What are you looking forward to in your future, in your career?
Continually editing with people who I love collaborating with and who inspire me, and creating content that inspires other people. And in this day and age, that also encourage hope and love for the world and the magic of the world. And we don't lose track of that. And when I'm doing documentary, honoring people who are honoring that. And in fiction, showing that we can be brave, and particularly young women. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I think we've learned a lot from you.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this week's episode, give us a like, leave us a question or comment, and share with your friends. Your viewership and support helps promote women working in film. Follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube, and join our Patreon community. Interested in being a guest or sponsor on the show? Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. See you next week on Women in Post.